Hi, this is part 3 on our segment on African art. In this video, we're going to be looking at sculpture, in particular power figures. Sacred medicine and divine protection are central to the belief of the Bakongo people, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Bakongo believe that the great god Nkongo brought the first sacred medicine, or Nkisi, down from heaven in an earthenware vessel set upon 3 stones of termite mounds, vessel set upon 3 stones or termite mounds. Nkisi, N-K-I-S-I, and the plural is Minkisi, is loosely translated as spirit, yet it is represented as a container of sacred substances which are activated by supernatural forces that can be summoned into the physical world. Visually, these Minkisi can be as simple as a pottery or vessel containing medicine herbs and other elements determined to be beneficial in curing physical illness or relieving social ills. In other instances, Minkisi can be represented as a small bundle, shelves, and carved, represented as small bundles, shells, and carved wooden figures. Minkisi represent the ability to both contain and release spiritual forces which can have both positive and negative consequences on the community. And so what you're looking at is a power figure, Nkisi and Kondi, from the Congo people. It dates late 19th century, and it's one of those sculptures that we talked, or one of the conventions we talked about, how you might have different mediums combined. So here you have wood, and then you have other objects such as nails, and sort of these sharp objects embedded into the sculpture. So Nkisi Nkondi, a fascinating example of a Nkisi can be found in a power figure called a Nkisi Nkonde. A power figure is a magical charm seemingly carved into the likeness of a human being, meant to highlight its function in human affairs. A Nkisi Nkondi can act as an oath-taking image, which is used to resolve verbal disputes or lawsuits, as well as an avenger. And seeks justice, or a guardian if any sorcery or any form of evil has been committed. These Minkisi are wooden figures representing a human or animal, such as a dog, because there are some dog ones, carved under the divine authority and in consultation with an Nganga, or spiritual specialist, who activates these figures through chants, prayers, and the preparation of sacred substances, which are aimed at curing physical, social, or spiritual ailments. So the Nkisi Nkonde figures are highly recognized through an accumulation of pegs, blades, nails, and other sharp objects inserted into its surface. Medicinal combinations called bilongo, B-I-L-O-N-G-O, are sometimes stored in the head of the figure, but frequently in the belly of the figure, which is shielded by a piece of glass, mirror, or other reflective surface. And so you can see that in this particular power figure. The glass represents the other world, inhabited by spirits of the dead who can peer through and see potential enemies. Elements with a variety of purposes are contained within the bilongo. Seeds may be inserted to tell a spirit to replicate itself. Pimba, or white soil deposits found near cemeteries, represent and enlist support from spiritual realms. Claws may incite the spirit to grasp something, while stones may activate the spirit to pelt enemies or protect one from being pelted. Europeans may have encountered these objects during the expeditions to the Congo as early as the 15th century. However, several of these fetish objects, which they are sometimes referred to, or they were referred to by Westerners, were confiscated by missionaries in the late 19th century and were destroyed as evidence of sorcery or heathenism. Nevertheless, several were collected as objects of fascination, and even as an object of study of Bakongo culture. Bakongo traditions, such as those of the Nkisi Nkonde, have survived over centuries and migrated to the Americas and the Caribbean via Afro-Atlantic religious practices, such as Voodoo, Palo Monte, and Macumba. In Hollywood, these figures have morphed into objects of superstition, such as in New Orleans, they might sort of represent something like a voodoo doll covered with stick pins. Nonetheless, the McKinsey have left an indelible imprint as visual protective figures of the spiritual importance. Are visually protective figures of spiritual importance and protection. We'll look at some close-ups. The insertions are driven into the figures by a ganga and represents the mambu, and the type of degrees of severity or of an issue can be suggested through the material itself. A peg may refer to a matter being settled, whereas a nail deeply inserted may represent a more serious offense, such as a murder. Prior to insertion, opposing parties or clients often lick the blades or nails to seal the function of the purpose of the Nkisi through their saliva. If an oath is broken by one of these parties, or evil befalls one of them, the Nkisi Nkonde will become activated to carry out its mission of destruction and divine protection. So it's sort of like a sort of sculptural contract between individuals, or a community, or different communities, or a community or with an individual. All right, so now we're going to start looking at African masks. I'm going to give you a few conventions and things to remember. One important aspect is that masks are created to be seen in motion as part of a dance or ritual. So the skill of the sculptors and again, the costumes that accompany them, the weavers, are considered equally important. Only one part of a whole costume, and not a separate entity, is very important. So it's really important in this culture that you don't separate the two. As with figures, a combination of naturalism and abstraction with a reduction of features and their orderly composition and symmetric, and usually they're symmetrically very symmetrical. Masks seem as powerful, and wearers stop being sort of their selves become a medium for this whatever power or they're trying to invoke. Almost always, rare exceptions, masks are only worn by men. We will look at one mask that is worn by female figures. And even when female spirits are being evoked, men will often still wear the masks. There are three basic types. There are face masks, which are attached to the head by being tied, usually worn in combination with some kind of headdress. Shoulder masks rest on shoulders, often have strips of fiber at base, which conceal wearer's body, and then head masks, which cover the entire head. So this is the first one we're going to be looking at. So this is the Owi Kimu portrait mask of Maya Yansi. And again, I'm doing an awful job with these pronunciations, so just make sure that you look, you look at the titles. The 400,000 Bali who lived in the central Corte de Voré in West Africa have a rich carving tradition. Many sculpted figures and masks of human form are utilized in personal shrines and in masquerade performances. This mask was part of a secular masquerade in the village of Camus in the early 1900s. So the Bali recognized two types of entertainment masks, goli and imblo, which you see the imblo is being displayed here, to perform a Mimblo mask, like the one depicted, a masker in a cloth costume conceals his face with a small wooden mask and dances for an audience accompanied by drummers, singers, dancers, and orators in a series of skits. In the village of Kami, the Mimblo parodies and dancers are referred to as Gabagba. When used in the Gabagda, masks were kept out of sight, so it is unusual that we get to see a mask displayed in this manner. To the Bali, sculptures serve many functions, and these can shift over time and within different contexts. The Gabagba masquerade is a form of entertainment no longer practiced in the Kami since the 1980s, replaced today by newer masks and performance styles. What is known, however, is that the mask like this one was not intended to be hung on a wall and appreciated first and foremost for their physical characteristics. Sculpture throughout West Africa has the power to act, to make things happen. A carving of a figure, for example, can be utilized by practitioners to communicate with ancestors and spirits. The physical presence of a mask can allow the invisible world to interact with and influence the visible world of humans. Scholar Susan Vogel mentions that Gabagda could bring social relief at the end of a long day and respite from everyday chores. It allowed residents to socialize, mourn, celebrate, feast, and even court each other. So again, it's really important too that it is sort of insulting, to these indigenous cultures that these artifacts were sort of appropriated and sort of put on display as, an object to be admired. And they are quite beautiful and sophisticated, but they had a purpose, and there was an intention to be used in a ritual, to be used as part of a performance. And so there's some contradictions and sort of ethical issues in terms of how a lot of these masks have been acquired and how they are displayed in museums. So here's a contextual photograph. In the case of the Gabagda mask, Vogel tells us that it was meant to honor a respected member of the Bali society. The mask is unusual. Most older African carvings come into Western collection without information about the artist or subject. But in this case, both the carver and the sitter have been recorded. In the photograph, we see an older woman seated next to the portrait mask. She is Moya Yonso, and this is her image carved by a well-known Bali artist, Owe Camus. And the man holding the mask is her stepson, who danced the mask in the Gabagda performance. It was commissioned and originally worn by Kume Ziare, Moyo Yonso's husband, and later his sons. Revered as a great dancer, Moya Yonso accompanied the mask in performances throughout her adult life until she was no longer physically able. This portrait mask tradition came to an end in the early 1980s with the decline of the Gabagba, and while entertainment masks continue, they are no longer carved to represent specific individuals. Portrait masks characteristically have an oval face with an elongated nose, a small open mouth, downcast slit eyes with projecting pieces that extend beyond the crest to suggest perhaps animal horns. Most also have scarification patterns at the temple, and these are, designs. This is a sort of body decoration where they incise or cut designs into their skin, and they scar and create these patterns. And then there's also this sort of high patina gloss on the surface of the mask. These stylistic attributes are actually a visual vocabulary that suggests what is meant to be good, honorable, respected, and beautiful, and a beautiful person, of what a beautiful person should represent in Bali society. The half-slit eyes and high forehead suggest a modesty and wisdom, respectively. The nasal labial fold depicted as a line between the sides of the nose to the outside of the mouth, and the beard-like projecting triangular patterns that extend from the bottom of the ears to the chin suggest age. The triangular base additions heighten the lustrous patina when danced in the sunlight, a suggestion of health. And again, we have to think too of what different cultures and societies recognized as ideal, beauty, or this idealization. And we've seen that. We've seen it with ancient Greeks. We've seen it with the Egyptians. I mean, we've seen it with all, different types of historical periods. So, in terms of an ideal in this society, the hairstyles of portrait masks are known to be quite realistic, but other features like the 6 projecting tubular pieces at the crown are abstract. This is not a realistic representation of the woman in the photograph. Rather, it suggests an idealized inner state of beauty and morality associated with Moyo Yonso. From West Africa to the Midwest, it is interesting to note the way in which African objects gather value in the West. This mask was acquired from the family of Moyo Yonso in 1997 by a collector in Brussels, then sold to a French collector, and finally sold to Sotheby's auction house in 1999 for over $197,000 US to a collector in Minneapolis. The mask has been exhibited at the Yale University Art Gallery, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Museum for African Art in New York. It is featured on the cover of Bali, African Art, Western Eye, which is a book by this scholar named Susan Vogel, who has written extensively on Bali art and first conducted field work in Kami Village in the 1960s. For many collectors in the West, it is the formal properties of the mask that are alluring. And you have to also remember, too, that in the early 20th century, many avant-garde artists like Matisse and Picasso, sought inspiration in what they called primitive art, and often collected African masks. They were these artists were looking for new stylistic avenues to represent the modern condition. Collectors today value the abstract qualities of Bali art. Vogel aptly notes that Bali believers first encounter the object's inner-dwelling spiritual powers or the metaphysical ideas it evokes, while the collector begins with the visible forms, colors, textures, the artist's materials, used to create the mask. Among the Bali up to the 1970s, this mask would remain hidden unless performed with musicians and dancers. To separate this mask from its masquerade is to give it a new life as an aesthetic object. Again, so we do kind of run into these sort of ethical, I think, situations in terms of taking an object and appropriating it and collecting it. And then sort of, when I look at this photo of this mask that belonged to this woman and she grew up with it and performed with it, it seems a very intimate and, sacred object that, I don't know, I think should not perhaps be on display. But, again, these are issues that do come up. Right, so we're going to look at another mask from the Democratic Republic of Congo. This dates from the early 20th century. It's made of wood, plant fiber, pigment, and copper alloy. This mask represents a beautiful young woman adorned with tattoos, earrings, and elaborate coiffure, and this is her hairstyle. The original Chikawi name referred to an adult woman who had given birth. The more recent name, which is spelled Mawana, P-W-O, I don't know how to pronounce that, Pow, probably adopted under European influences, emphasizes youthful feminine beauty. The artist carved this mask with a very delicate, even, thin walls from the wood Alstonia. The surface is a rich reddish brown color, probably obtained from a mixture of red clay and oil. It has a beautiful patina, a sign of long use, or this kind of wear or shine. The half-closed eyes, placed in large concave sockets, are covered with white clay called kaolin, Kaolin. The eyes, slender nose, elliptical mouth, and these sort of symmetrical ears are delicately carved on a face delineated by a softly modeled forehead and concave chin. And you do see a sort of naturalism combined with stylistic and sort of geometric conventions. The major components of the fiber coiffure, or her hairstyle, are a braided headband and a fringe at the rear of her neck. Chikawi women typically wore hairstyles entirely coated with red earth, known as toda. And the artist has carved several different representations of tattoos on the mask, and again, depending, a lot of these masks have different variations of tattoos or representations of scarification. Apparently on the left cheek and forehead are tiny triangles of a tattoo known as Singalengili. Originally, Singalengili occurred as a necklace in the form of a cross cut from a tin plate worn by the Chikawi as an amulet. During the 17th century, Capuchin monks from the Order of Christ of Portugal had distributed medals in the form of a cross throughout Chikawi country, and this cross was probably the prototype for the Singangili. On the right cheek of the mask is a tattoo, and again, these are very subtle, called a Cingilo, Cijingo, in combination with a cross. Cingilo denotes a spiral brass bracelet, and I think we looked at those when we were looking at the Benin brass plaque at the beginning of the unit. On the forehead and extending to the temples is a tattoo known as Mite Lamuna, or knitted eyebrows, an allusion to discontentness or arrogance. Under the eyes are tattoos known as Masahali, Masogi, and again, please refer to my lecture notes when I post them on these spellings, signifying tears. PWO, or Mawani PWO, is one of the most popular dancing masks among the Chikawi, because they followed a matriarchal descent, which means it comes from the mother's line, not the father's. The Chikawi dance POW, PWO, they dance to honor the founding female ancestors of the lineage. A male dancer is dressed like a woman in a costume of braided fiber that completely covers his body and hides his identity. He wears a loincloth, carries a fan, and moves in a slow, precise steps to emulate a woman. When the mask becomes unusable, it is discarded. When the masquerader dies, the mask is buried with the dancer. All right, I'm gonna stop here for now. It's been about 20 minutes, and usually that seems like a good time to stop. In our next segment, we'll be looking at some more masks. We'll return to looking at some sculptures, in particular shrine figures and some fertility figures. So stay tuned.